I would like to welcome you all to this recorded conversation today. My name is Konstantin. I run a design studio based in Vienna called Studio Elastic. And today I'm here with my old friend and collaborator Wolfgang Fiedl. We've been basically invited by PDP to record this conversation. I've been very lucky to be invited twice already to Novi Sad to speak at the conference, at the festival, and obviously due to current circumstances, we basically were asked if we could record this conversation. Wolfgang is a new addition to the team of speakers this year. We are basically old friends and collaborators, and Wolfgang is running a design and architecture practice in Vienna called ICP, Institute of Cultural Policies. And I would like to ask you, what are you thinking of right now, Wolfgang?
Yeah, I'm thinking of our conversation actually, whether we managed to pull this off, which is a kind of first-time occasion, like the way we are staging it here. Also, actually, the place where we are located is quite special, I can say. Mm-hmm. It's of course not a matter of coincidence. We thought about the question where we're going to stage the whole conversation, and the fact that we are sitting here in front or behind the thing which is here in the back, which is a full dome basically, is of course no matter of coincidence, because first of all we both teach here, which is the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. More precisely, this is the Department of Digital Arts, in which the Full Dome Lab, which is the correct title, is located, which is exactly the place we are going to sit here now. And also, I think it's actually quite nice to have a setting which indicates also partly as well, at least to my understanding, the fact that we are both hands-on people. We like stuff, we like objects, we like actually to work with real things. And that's something I think which connects us ever since we met first, I would say.
Absolutely. I still remember well the first time we met. I think it must have been probably about 15 years, 12 to 15 years. Do you remember the time we met?
Yes, I think it was longer than 15 years, unfortunately, I can say.
Was it?
Well, it was in London, that's for sure, and it was, we got introduced by a friend of mine who happened to be the brother of my then girlfriend, with whom you lived together in London in a flat.
Yes.
And we all studied actually basically in London, which was the sole purpose for being there. Although there was a bit of party thing going on as well at the time. Well, for me it was quite intense, really studying time, I have to say. But nevertheless, it was a beautiful time, which we all enjoyed. And it was our first kind of exposure, and I had a really warm and good feeling right away, actually. And although not knowing where the further life will lead us, after London, we then ended up meeting quite soon back in Vienna, actually. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Actually, we have been also we stayed in touch, and we also have been working together quite a lot. We're really strong collaborators ever since. I think it must have, again, talking about numbers, but it must have been probably around 15 to 20 projects we've worked on together. In all different fields, but mostly exhibition and art related stuff, but also publications. We've done a few publications together. So I would like to introduce your practice a little bit. The Institute of Cultural Policy basically deals with quite a few themes, or you're really bringing quite a few themes together. I've already briefly talked about it. The theme of design is a very important part, but also architecture. You are actually an architect. but also art exhibitions and quite a bit of academia. Can you tell us, just as a big theme for you, but can you just give us an overview of these fields merging and what it is that you are actually doing with your practice?
In order to do that, I will have to unpack the various layers, which built up over the last, say, 15 to 20 years. Because really, the Institute of Cultural Policy is the sort of culmination of many things I have been doing previously. So it's kind of, it's quite a young company as well, I founded the company together with my wife some now almost 4 years ago, which is a fairly recent sort of event in that sense. But it really is the sort of culmination, as I said, of many layers that I added up over the last 15 to 20 years. Starting with, of course, academia as the kind of background I'm coming from as a trained architect, earning my first back then shillings or euros, in architectural studios, like really traditional sort of good old orthodox architecture, building houses, stuff like that, But then quickly moving into the realm of art, fine arts. Back then with my partner Alexandra Berlinger, with whom I founded this platform called Tatort, and with whom I actually then ended up doing, like, at least for 10, 12 years, quite intense, sort of mostly site-specific kind of art projects, socially engaged work, politically engaged art pieces. So it was a very intense and really a very focused time where I was solely actually working in the realm of arts. Never lost my sight of architecture and other interests I had at the same time as well. But of course, clearly, the fact that we did lots of exhibitions as artists remained like a mainstay in my sort of overall portfolio, if you want, to the current day. But then architecture kept on creeping back in, actually, but almost more like a way of thinking, almost like a sort of methodology or a toolbox, Not in the sense that I would come back to say, okay, I'm now building houses or I'm dealing with sort of traditional ways that architecture is usually associated with, but really like as a toolbox, Because architecture is a quite nice study, if you see it from a sort of more strategic perspective, You learn a lot of sort of formal things. You learn how to organize things, you learn how to structure things. But there's a lot of different sort of knowledge fields and practices actually overlapping and coming together.
Yes.
And that's a fairly good foundation actually for doing anything. I give you a good example. I mean, it's a cheesy one, but it comes to mind as I talk about it. Virgil Abloh, the celebrated fashion hero. He is an architect by training, and he keeps on claiming himself actually that the architecture is actually a quite nice foundation, for whatever you happen to be doing, in the realm of creative endeavors, And then the field of academia you mentioned was always close to me as well, because ever since I left university, I was teaching in one or the other capacities in various universities. One thing, and the other was that at some point I decided to have to be doing a PhD, to really go one step further into formalizing this kind of academic way of researching, unpacking a knowledge field, and really formalizing the kind of findings into a concise sort of piece of work, including a really sort of concise methodological sort of way of going about things. So this kind of discipline, of academia was always with me as well, Sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. So and all these layers sort of now have been leading to the point where I said, okay, now I can say I can found an institute, which sounds quite stern, and quite serious, which it is to a certain extent, but it's fun still, Secondly, I can really talk into depth about this really sort of blurry thing which is called culture, and the policy is really this kind of formal, way of actually packing something into a sort of strategic piece of information.
So the policy making is also like something that you have also studied, right?
Exactly. So that was part of my PhD studies, you know, so which was in the realm of political science, you know, after all. That was the sort of main focus of my PhD, which took 7 years because it was at the site. It was a so-called part-time PhD, so it took a long time.
In England as well.
In England, it was in Plymouth, at the University of Plymouth, where there was one guy, he still actually does it, it's the so-called Planetary Collegium. So it's a quite funny name, but it kind of tells a lot about the sort of idea of the founding figure, which is Professor Roy Ascott, who really founded this PhD with the idea that anyone who would actually make up the PhD based on a lot of different types of practices is allowed to study with him and is allowed to actually join the University of Plymouth for that sole purpose of actually mixing quite a bundle of quite diverse sort of backdrops into one concise piece of work. So in my case, it was really like the architectural component, the art component, then of course this kind of activistic sort of political and socially engaged element in my artwork, and the sort of sole sort of philosophy of politics, if you want.
And that mix, so basically you're bringing a mix to the table, which is, you know, if you would look at it maybe uninformed, it would look like fields that are not so much connected, but you somehow managed to really connect them in a very beautiful way, almost in a way that it feels like they need to be connected. It's almost as if one could not function without the other.
Well, from my point of view, that's certainly the case, you know. So I never actually, and I'm really proud to say this, and I thought about this like a million times over, because things just seem to have fallen in place, you know, looking back, you know.
As if it was written already and it's just
Exactly.
unfolding.
But I was discovering them, you know, and it was a quite long and sometimes a quite sort of heavy
A journey.
a heavy journey I had to take, you know. And there was lots of failures. There was lots of moments when I sort of lost my belief in the sort of in the sense that I'm making of all this sort of disparate types of practices, you know. And many people kept on asking, so what the heck is it you're doing? I mean, we don't understand. Sometimes you do this, you have like many different kinds of hats. You're not doing things seriously. You stay at the surface. You appear to be shallow, you know. And I said, yeah, that may be so from your point of view, you know. But for me, it has to be like that, you know. There's a kind of inner purpose in connecting the bits and pieces from my perspective. And I always told people, you know, give me a couple of more years, and it, even from outside it starts to make more sense, you know, which I believe now is actually the point.
Absolutely. Know? So, but let's for everyone to understand, let's go to the source basically. So you're from a place in Austria which is, you know, for me being Viennese. From the most eastern part of Austria, the furthest away. It's if I would want to drive to where you are from, I think it's like basically the longest way through our country that we can take. It's about a 7 hours drive through this little country.
Which is absurd for a small place like Austria.
It's absurd. I think actually to get there we even have to leave Austria for a little bit, because the highway goes through Germany for a little bit to get there. So some people would even argue that it's not even Austria anymore. It's where's that place, and where have you grown up?
Well, the place is called Vorarlberg, which is a state, one of the 9 states of Austria, and it's the furthest away from Vienna in the sense of being the most western state of Austria. It borders to Switzerland and the south of Germany, around an area which is called Lake Constance region, you know, so Lake Constance being the big lake that we all border to. So it's a quite mountainous, you know, it's a quite beautiful area in terms of the quality of nature, the natural environment. And at the same time, it has more resemblance when it comes to the sort of mindset of people to Switzerland and Germany, you know, in many ways, you know. That's just, you know, that's just because of the geography relates us more to that parts of Europe than to the eastern part of Austria, you know.
So actually, for me, something that I find would somehow define that era is actually a very strong sense and a very educated sense of architecture. Actually, like architecture plays a really big role of that region.
Yeah.
And also craftsmanship. So why is that?
That's a very good question, and you're obviously not the first one to ask that. And I was trying to unpack that very question already myself, actually, through various ways, not least through a quite big exhibition that I had the pleasure to curate and to conceptualize. Probably come to talk about that a bit later. But I think most importantly is really the element of the craftsmanship. So since it is this kind of mountainous area, and culture really didn't play a really huge role for quite a long time. So it was actually a rural place, where farmers actually predominantly set the scene, for what was going on. And so culture was really not in that sense, culture in the sense of the high culture, art and all that kind of thing, did not feature that highly on anyone's list for that matter for a long time. So the sophistication and the quality and the sort of ingenuity of the people, which certainly they have, was directed towards other pastimes or or professions, including a lot of the craftsmanship you mentioned already, but also then engineering to a certain degree. So it is a very industrialized area, compared
tucked
to
away between the mountains, right?
Exactly. So mechanical engineering, the sort of ingenuity went into the inventions of, all sorts of equipment, machinery, tools, and that kind of stuff. And also architecture, and architecture on the back of the craftsmanship culture, because the first architects who happened to actually take up the quality of the craftsmanship at eye level, sort of in the 60s and 70s of the last century, really benefited heavily and hugely from the level and sophistication of the craftspeople, So it was almost like the other way around, that the craftspeople informed the sort of people who came from academia, the young sort of aspiring architects, in order to really take the sort of lofty ideas from their studies onto the ground, into the sort of reality of the people and the needs of the people in Vorarlberg. And that's the kind of special sort of breeding ground for this type of architecture we are talking about.
Also a breeding ground for you. So little Wolfgang growing up there, surrounded by an incredible amount of really gorgeous architecture. I've just last year been to Bregenz, where I noticed that something that I've never ever seen anywhere else. For example, you go through the streets and you see all the different periods of architecture, all the different eras, but shuffled together in a way that really works. So you have old meets new in a very unique way. So tell me, when you were a kid, were you basically the kid who was building the most amazing Lego castles?
Yeah, totally. I was totally that kind of nerdy sort of building type, hands-on type, I would say, in a more general sense. That stuck with me, of course, obviously till the current day, but there's many things in between. But going back to the formative time, first of all, I was really this crafty kid. I was building Lego and all kinds of kit-like sort of tools and toys and whatever have you. On top of that, I was really drawn to this craftsmanshipness, of the area first. So the first idea I had in my mind about an occupation I would then take up as a grown-up eventually, back then when I was 6-7 years old, was to become a carpenter,
Yeah.
So really this kind of hands-on-ness of my formative years was a really important element, and I really related to nature in many ways,
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time in nature. I'm such an outdoor kid. I was such an outdoor kid. I'm still an outdoor man, an outdoor person, because I really have a close relationship to nature in many ways. Trees, animals, whatever have you, anything that nature has, including the kind of memories of smells, scents, but very specific sounds as well. The tactileness, the tactile quality of the sort of various elements that appear in nature. So all these things are the sort of are deeply, ingrained, in my sort of in my kind of memory as really important building blocks for whatever I did after that.
And is that something, because also me, I grew up in the really, I was like the last house on the street before the forest. So I would consider myself as a forest boy more than a city boy, actually, at heart. But sitting in a place like this, packed with technology and stuff like that, do you miss that nature part? Do you get that through travels or by going back home to Vorarlberg, or do you get that through books, or how do you get that nature back into your life, being surrounded by so much technology and digital things?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, because of course at the same time, I mean, I miss nature whenever I'm not in nature, being in cities or spaces like this, obviously. But on the other hand, of course, we all know how much technology did change already our lives and continues to change them. And there's no way around that, We have to sort of arrange some sort of relationship with the sort of technological edge of our existence, if I may say it like that. And that's a reality which we share, like most immediately, being teachers here at the Department of Digital Arts. All things digital, all things technological, is actually what we are being in touch with, and essentially are asked to be teaching and talking about as well.
But isn't it also like, for example, if I look at what I'm teaching here, it's actually quite hands-on and quite analog, actually. So
exactly.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to bring into this bunch here is a little bit of the craft and I think it's the same with you, right?
Totally so. And I think that's the quality of our specific sort of entry point, into this department especially, but also in general, the way we do things, if I may talk like for both of us in that sense, because I know you so well, I know exactly, believe to know quite well how you tick, I need to be careful here. So I think I can speak for both of us that the sort of tactility, the realness, the physicality of things is extremely important. And I think that's actually the quality that we may bring to the table, which discerns us from quite a lot of other people, that we are actually able to fuse these sort of two ends of a story quite nimbly and quite nicely and quite uniquely, and to make it into a kind of new hybrid experience, as I like to refer to it, which is exactly what would we bring to the table.
So it's almost also bringing in slight imperfections or maybe like glitches in the perfection of industrialized processes, right? So it's the humanness.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Looking at the output of your studio, I can actually see a strong human element in it. Is that something that you are basically consciously trying to maintain, or is this something that just is just there by chance?
No, not at all, actually. It's not by chance. It's a deeply conceptualized thing, and this is where the sort of philosophy PhD person in me comes to the fore. This is something which is really almost at the very bottom of my strategic way of positioning me in the world around me, which is to claim, first of all, that I'm a humanist, And many people deemed humanism to be dead, like already 10, 15 years ago, including a lot of philosophers, I'm totally opposed to that position in many ways. I mean, this is a topic in its own right, but nevertheless, that's the first thing, Humanism is at the core of what I'm doing. Secondly, I think even if you maintain the position that the technology is going to be more and more important even in the future than it is already now, there's never going to be the humanistic point is never going to be lost. Humans are never going to be losing out like entirely in this equation. There's always going to be the spot where the human element is coming into the picture. And you know what? And this is thanks for the segue. The erroneous, the sort of glitches, is something that makes it all the more worthwhile actually talking and thinking about this, because this is actually a quality that we should be talking about rather than a problem, And so the sort of strange and devious ways by which humans go about things, it's at first may appear to be a problem, but actually it's a quality, Once you start learn to dealing with it, like in a positive and a sort of warm way of addressing it rather than sort of dismissing it, And secondly, if you start seeing that the whole endeavor as a humanistic one, I think it again opens up the spectrum of the kinds of work that you are able to do. Also from a point of view that even when you lack a certain piece of information or a certain sort of quality or experience, you always have the kind of bridge or the sort of segue of actually connecting to someone who gives you exactly what you are missing. So like the idea of actually co-working, collaborating, cooperating, building teams, working in teams, working as collectives, working with like-minded colleagues, like you are one, is actually something that is really at the core of my sort of working philosophy as well. I don't need to know everything myself, I only need to know who knows, and how to engage and to work with these kinds of people. And I think we actually are a perfect example for that kind of...
Absolutely. Looking at the things that we've done together, for example, there, coming to that humanness, there's a really beautiful example, not what we have done, but something that describes that is, to whoever is listening, had the chance to visit Tate Modern in London, for example. There's something, you have this incredible building, huge and just like mesmerizing. But then there's something that's really strange and beautiful at the same time, and that's the floor. So it's basically you walk through the space and it's got this untreated wooden floor that basically ages by time because people walk over it, and so it starts to, and it's like, and you wonder like how was it possible that they did that, the person responsible, the architect responsible for that was actually able to get this approved, something that is actually aging and almost falling apart over time. And there is somehow there's something very beautiful in that, and I personally, in my design practice, I try to incorporate that as well somehow, something that is not perfect, something that is maybe a little mistake, that's an error that's not supposed to be there. And I think it's something that I'm looking for, that I'm looking for when I'm looking at other people's work somehow. That's the work that's somehow sticking with me, and your output definitely has that element. So I'm just remembering now wooden structures that are somehow like combining fragility but also crudeness, somehow combining two very opposing features. So can you tell us, what if you would have to, can you tell us maybe like a handful of the most essential aspects that a piece of work that you want to output has to have?
Well, that's really tough, especially in a spontaneous way like this. I try to sort of get about it, by sort of deviating around the sort of question. So, but you touched upon a really important thing with the sort of imperfection of things, and the fact that things age, they change their appearance over time, That leads me to one really important element, a factor in my work, which is really like a sort of common denominator through all the kind of work I'm doing, which is the element of time. So time is really of the utmost importance for me. And see, this goes completely against the grain of any sort of traditional way of thinking about architecture and the way it's being taught, which is, it's kind of this, this profession where a building has to stay forever. This kind of, this sort of endless sameness, of the appearance of something that is being put up there to be there forever, I'm totally against that idea. I'm totally opposed to that. It's beautiful if we have some sort of monuments, and things we can remember about the past. And that will always exist anyways, by and of itself. That's an aspect of culture, of preservation, and so on and so forth. But in terms of talking about the kind of architecture that I stand for, time for me is essential in the sense that things can fall apart, things can disappear. Give things the sort of freedom to actually age, to disappear, to turn into a new shape, The sort of temporal appearance of something is really important for me. That's one thing. Space in conjunction with time is the other element, obviously also important. And the way I'm talking about architecture and art at the same time is through the lens of space, rather than a building or a edifice or an object or something like that. So in the conjunction of space and time leads to this idea of the performance. So performativity or the performance is exactly the conjunction of space and time. So you have something in a space that changes its shape, its appearance over time. And that sort of performativity of space and anything that happens inside is really the sort of most basic common denominator of the way I approach things. And it doesn't matter whether I do a book, an exhibition, a piece of art, or a strategy for a company, you know, when it comes to a sustainability issue, you know, within a company, which is something that we keep on and doing like as of late quite frequently as well. So that's the sort of very core of our philosophy.
And tell me, so we have met in London, and you have been, you know, somehow commuting between Austria and London and also other places for quite a few years. So, for example, in my practice, my studio is called Studio Elastic, and that is because I always knew that I need to be elastic, I need to be flexible, I need to basically be able to expand or contract depending on where I am and what I'm doing. And so, you know, I started doing nomadic work really 20 years ago when nomadic work wasn't a thing. So for me, I didn't have like other people that would inspire me, like how to do things, how to work remotely. I just did it, you know. I would drive around and hack with my laptop, you know. We called it is a weird word, but it was called war driving, where you would drive basically with your laptop open and you would search for an open Wi-Fi network, which most of them were open and didn't have passwords, to be able to get an internet connection to send stuff to clients. So that's how I always worked. I think the travel aspect is a really essential one for you as well, correct?
Totally, hugely important. I mean, I think that's the reason why our respective work resonated, like mutually from the very beginning. I remember actually your masterpiece in London, your master thesis, where you have been dragging a cart filled with color through London, basically through a part of London, East London, and leaving a line on the pavement, basically. You know, I mean, a beautifully poetic piece, you know, which deeply resonated with me, and it's a beautiful example for this mobileness and the sort of temporariness of things.
Exactly.
And also, you know, this kind of nomadic idea is something that I keep on, trying to get my head around ever since I remember actually thinking consciously about the quality of architecture that I am looking for. You know, things that are being mobile, that are being moved around. You know, that are not permanently at the same spot. You know, for an indefinite amount of time. You know, and I think. Another thing you actually touched upon is this kind of fact, is this an idea that one needs to travel in order to actually fulfill the full potential of this kind of nomadic, quality of life. I mean, it has got sort of a dirty sort of undertone now with global warming and all that flying around. This is being seen rather as a problem and certainly not the answer anymore. Globalization is also this kind of buzzword, you know, for everyone who is seen as a capitalist and so on and so forth. But you know, and many of those things are obviously true, you know. But at the same time, for me, globalization is something that is a spiritual and an intellectual process, rather than anything else that is being usually associated with it, you know. So for me, I need the influence of the planet at large, you know. Anything that I can soak up is the basis for the kind of work I'm doing, you know. So I'm immensely curious. And to restrain my curiosity to one singular spot on this planet would feel almost like losing out on
all the others.
On all the others, on the entire culture that is out there, you know, on the entire richness of the planet, you know. So I have my huge problems now. Obviously, I know you do as well, with the current situation, being grounded, you know. Not being able to travel, meeting friends, collaborating with other people, soaking up things that are really tremendously interesting, and I find them usually in other places, you know.
I find it quite interesting because last year, I've been doing a lot of work with musicians and the music industry, working a lot with labels and musicians. And there's one guy, for example, that I really appreciate him. He does amazing stuff. He's an Austrian guy. His name is Manu Del Lago. He's a hang player. Actually, he even played, for quite a long time in Björk's band. Was kind of like part of Björk's whole setup. And last year he went on a tour. I think it was an Austria tour on bicycles. So they were like actually touring. The whole band was riding on bicycles through Austria, and so I think we can also redefine what travel means. We have to. I think we're forced to, as we see now. We can't just go to the United States, and people from the US can't come to Europe. There's no way right now, unless you find a loophole. There is probably a few loopholes, but it's very difficult to travel. And it's almost like we take it for, we don't even talk about it anymore. It's normal, right? It's like, it's just how it is. There's one thing in what we're doing right now. We should be actually, in Serbia, talking in front of an audience and interacting and engaging with people. Which we do now through this screen, I found it very, very challenging to teach via Zoom, because for me the main reason of the main thing that gave me, gave me the thing with teaching was, being in the room with my students and getting the feedback and seeing their sparkles in their eyes and seeing the frustrations. But I guess we're adapting, right? So we hope it's not going to last forever. But there is, if I look at your output from your studio, there is quite a lot of work that's really happened in faraway places. So right now I'm thinking about your work with a leper colony in India, or another beautiful project in West Sudan. How do you, first of all, how do you get to these places, and in what role? So if you're going to places that are developing, in what role do you go there, and what would a project like that look like? Give us a rough kind of like overview.
So I mean, you mentioned that's the right way of framing the question, because first of all, there's an important thing to be mentioned up front, which is that you don't happen to end up in places like that just because you decide privately that you're going to do that. So it's in both cases it's a mandated way of being brought or asked or introduced to these places. Basically in whatever position it can be, for international organizations, like in the case of South Sudan, with a mandate by the United Nations. In case of India, it was by a mandate of the university in Linz, which is a university here in Austria, which had a program up and running there together with local NGOs, actually trying to look into the sort of immediate living circumstances of the community of these leprosy affected people. In that very case of India, I was really actually I was commissioned to be the project manager of a group of students who continued to go there in order to build together with the local community, with the local people, various projects like buildings. One was a school, an extension to the existing school. Then we did a nursery, we did a community center, we did 2 projects in the realm of housing, improving the immediate housing conditions. So that was really hands-on together with the students from Austria, coming in and out like frequently in a sort of 3-month interval, and then we had the local people working with us together at the same time.
Is it dangerous to work with people in the leper community?
Not from a medical point of view, no. It is dangerous more from a psychological point of view, because of course these people are heavily indebted, in the sense of having to having to bear all the sort of stigmatizations they receive from the society at large around them, from people around them, being sort of basically locked up in a camp, you know, which was the one in which we have been working in, you know, being this sort of segregated sort of people, you know, within their own sort of community is really tough to take from a mental point of view, you know. So in that sense, I think it was really sort of, it was kind of hard to enter the kind of whole situation from a psychological point of view, like an immediate sort of human to human point of view. So that was the biggest hurdle in that case. In the case of South Sudan, it was another hurdle, which was the fact that South Sudan currently still is in a war, in a civil war sort of situation, which is the reason why only United Nations mandated people are allowed internationally actually to enter the place.
So I could not fly to West Sudan
No.
right now.
For example, you need really like the permit from the United Nations or any kind of international organization operating on the ground, for that matter. And of course, there's a lot of security issues and real threats to one's own security and health, for that matter. So in that case, it's really like a physical problem more than it is a social or psychological ones. Although, of course, that comes to the equation as well. Obviously, having to deal with people which are under the sort of effect of a civil war, which is raging almost since the inception of the Republic of South Sudan, which was in 2012, which now is sort of roughly 8 years, takes its toll on the mental situation of the people there as well. Obviously, so it's in both cases, it's very complicated, and you really need your time to tune in to understand what's going on, to really sort of get at eye level, you know, in a lot of ways with the people you're having to deal with, and you're trying to help with and trying to work together with at the end of the day. You know?
So this humanness that you're working with, especially in these cases. How does that differ from the humanness, for example, of dealing with a big, consulting a big corporation in Austria, for example, or somewhere else? So basically, you're not just doing, work with developing communities, but also with, big established corporations. Can you find things that are connecting these very different fields, or is it two totally separate things you're doing?
I think it's both to a certain extent, but for me, the sort of overlappings outweighed the sort of differences, because in the end of the day, we are talking about human beings, with whom we communicate, with whom we interact, with whom we are actually getting the work done at the end of the day. So from me, the entry point is the sort of idea of the organization. So as I said, being mandated from an organization like the university, like the United Nations, or working with a company like an established company here in Europe, which is also a big organization in the end, is always the sort of lens I'm trying to sort of get about these kind of engagements. Meaning that an organization is only as good and as responsive as the human element inside the organization. So I'm always rejecting whenever people say I blame it on the system, it's the problem of the system. I'm totally opposed to that kind of view, because there's no such thing as an automized sort of self-running system, it's always the human element.
The humans running it.
You only have to look close enough, first of all, and secondly, you have to be willing to engage, which is sometimes painful, of course. It's not always positive,
The willing to engage brings me to another question that I often ask myself when I think about you. Before you talked about a project that you want to go more into depth, which is a really beautiful project called Getting Things Done. Before you do that, before you go into this project, I would like to ask you, what do you actually do when you don't work? Because to me it seems you always work. Do you ever sleep?
Yeah, I do sleep, first of all, but of course probably not as long as others, I don't know. See, this is the point. I think I really, and we talked about this funny enough actually quite recently, so probably that's the reason why you're asking me this, just to frame it for the viewers or listeners. I have I developed over the years, or decades, I may have to say actually, a kind of holistic take on things, you know. So this may sound a bit sort of spiritual or whatever, New Age is, or whatever you call it. I don't mind actually, because I really mean what I'm saying. This holistic take I'm trying to sort of get at is really the kind of bigger picture I'm talking about, which is the fact that everything is connected to everything in a certain way. We only have to convey the linkages, you know, we only have to convey that the relations are there. And then, of course, conveying is also starting to understand, starting to analyze, and starting to understand how they work, and starting to understand how we can intervene or even manipulate, you know, some of these linkages, you know. And I mean that in a sort of positive way of manipulating. And I'm not saying I have the whole map is in my mind, obviously, but parts of it, you know. At least I would say big enough parts for me to sort of link more things than many other people probably are able to do, you know. That's I think fair enough to be saying.
That's what I observe, at least when I work with you, or I get close to you, you know, that you somehow have this incredible clarity about things, that somehow where I have a feeling about it, you can put it into words, which is for me something that it's like I don't know how you do that, but it's so things are coming together basically.
Yeah, but it's really again layers and layers and layers of studying, of reading, of experience. It's a philosophy, you know. It's a life philosophy. I mean, it's not as easy as to say I woke up and had the eureka moment, and now the map, like, you know, is in front of my mind's eye, and I can read the whole code behind the surface and all that, you know. The sort of Neo moment, as I call it, you know, which I love anyways, but it's not quite like that. So it's layers of building up, studying, starting to understand a bit better. And of course, by the way, reading books is not a bad thing, even today,
Reading
you know,
books.
with all the technology, handheld devices, blogs, social media things, and so on and so forth. It's still a good thing, and I recommend it dearly to my students as well, to reading books, you know.
Absolutely, but basically the bigger thing than reading books, really, like the really big thing about is getting things done.
Yeah,
correct?
exactly. That's also at the heart of my, you know, but here comes the experience, you know. So, and don't get me wrong, that no one is getting me wrong, is really important to emphasize this. Reading is only part of the story, if at best 50%. The other part is getting my hands on stuff, getting my hands dirty, you know, sticking my boots into the ground, you know, being really that hands-on experience person, you know, is really important. And that overlapping is probably the most fertile, you know, and most sort of promising ground upon which new ideas really can sort of come to life. And that's exactly the kind of ground where I usually get my best ideas, you know, to say, okay, getting things done means that you need a strong conceptual foundation, obviously, but at the same time, you need to know how you're getting it done, you know? So you need to have the tools of the trade in order to convey the idea and to convey the message, to bring it in a space in a case of an exhibition.
So that exhibition, getting things done, is an exhibition that you kind of conceived also. You've developed. You've basically taken with you around the world. Tell us a little bit about it. Time is running out, but just so we get an overview.
It's an exhibition that was going on for almost 6 years. It was shown in, I think, almost 35 locations all over the planet. It was organized and run by the Austrian Foreign Ministry. And the idea of the exhibition was really to study and exhibit the sort of recent history of architecture and craftsmanship in Vorarlberg. Okay. Exactly what we talked about before. And if I talk about, and if I say recent history, we talk about the last 50, 60 years, which is the post-war period, basically up until now, you know. And which is this incredible period where this kind of craftsmanship-ness and also the type of architecture that you have been talking about came about in the state of Vorarlberg. Yeah. So the exhibition tries to sort of convey the story, also the kind of emergence of the phenomena, as I keep on calling it, and with various means. But the sort of central element of the exhibition is again the human element, which is the conversation, to be more precise. Exactly what we are doing here. So my idea was to say, I can only, because we are not talking about a written sort of history, which is easily accessible on the level of text, books, internet, whatever have you as a means. But you need to we need to unearth the knowledge, you know. And the only way of doing that is to actually talk to the actors, talk to the people, to the protagonists of the movement as such, you know. And that was clear from the beginning. So I thought about a kind of methodology. How can I do this? Private conversations, I take notes, whatever. And then eventually I said, well, if I happen to go to all these people, and we talk about 60 plus people, you know, it's an ongoing project, by the way, still, because it was quite successful. I said, let's do it in the way of a formal interview. Let's frame it like a formal interview, so many people can participate in the same experience, like me being the one sitting together with these people. And the interviews are still on the internet, you know. Everyone can look at it.
English or German?
There's an English short version of sort of 5, abbreviated version of 5 to 8 minutes, you know, and the long version is unfortunately only in German. But it's over 60 hours of recorded and edited conversation. So it's oral history, you know, and see, but told by the very people who actually did it, you know. So I'm only the sort of mediating element. I'm only there actually to bring it about. I'm the kind of in-between guy, if you want. You know?
And sorry, that was actually an exhibition, a touring exhibition, right?
Exactly.
So going to places like, what's the wildest place that you found yourself in?
I mean, there's many, but one that kind of stuck was Halifax, because it was, I mean, everyone probably knows Halifax. I knew it on you know, with the finger on the map, basically. It's this kind of Canadian outpost. Sorry for the people in Halifax, it's really fantastic. But it was super cold. It was like the cliche sort of image of Canada. But it was a fantastic experience because I had no idea actually how people would react to this kind of content in a place like Halifax. But I had the most beautiful workshop with a group of students from the local university. And it was a beautiful relationship in the sense that they resonated with the stuff on some level, you know, whatever it was. You know, for me, that was a good experience as well to see actually how many layers you actually have in order to resonate with the stuff. Once you convey the sort of DNA of the whole thing, you know. So the idea of the exhibition was not to present a slick surface, but the whole mechanism, you know, the DNA, as I call it, of this development, of this movement. And if you see the whole plan, you know, open, laid out in front of you, you are able to relate to the building blocks, you know. So, and this is the kind of vehicle idea of an exhibition that I love so dearly, to actually restrain our sort of inclination as designers to make it beautiful, to make it glossy. That's good. That
make
comes
it
on top
real,
but
right?
make it real, make it accessible, you know. That's really most important for me.
So people in Halifax now can relate to architecture from Vorarlberg.
I mean, to a certain extent, I believe, which is quite amazing.
So where can people find more about your work?
Well, there's online sources, obviously, you know. I mean, there's 2 websites. One is the Tatort website, which is really my artistic work. It's TAT. I think it's going to be seen then.
We are going to link everything
exactly.
below.
So that's one thing, which is my artistic work. And the other one is my work now under the name of ICP, Institute for Cultural Policy, which has also its website. It's not entirely up to date, sorry for that. But it gives you a fairly good overview of.
You're a busy man, so you're more busy.
Something has to suffer.
Exactly.
You know?
So tell us, ICP, so institute. So actually, the Institute of Cultural Policy is an institute.
Yeah, it is.
And what I find quite fascinating is that the name Institute of Cultural Policy somehow already incorporates your fields of interest. So basically the institute is like an architectural kind of creation. It's like the architecture, not just of a building, but the architecture of an institute to make it stand as an institute. Then the culture is the human kind of like the art and the humanness coming together. And the policy is the policy making, which you're so interested in. Kind of like looking behind the curtain of how things work, right?
Exactly. The policy is really this kind of institution building element that I really worked upon for the last 20 years really heavily, and which is basically at the core of my PhD as well. The idea that to make a human experience a bit more valuable and also sort of durable in the sense of a social contract, which is really the sort of foundation of the very fact that we live in a kind of ordered way and human way together, is really dependent on a certain degree of structural integrity, you know, which is really this institutionalized sort of quality of things, you know. So and this lies in everything, you know, starting from the university up until to a corporation with whom we work with now on the level of environmental policies and stuff like that. So it's always the same sort of set of basic things, you know, that you need to be looking into, you know, when you start working with organizations, coming back to that idea. And the Institute really has another element as well, which is really this idea of formalizing things on a research or academic level.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
So that we really do sort of serious work, not to say that there's no fun, quite on the contrary, but serious in the sense of formalizing things to be compared with other things other people are doing and have done previously. To go public, you know, to really be someone who is exposed publicly with a set of ideas and policies in the sense of putting something to be debated, you know, which is really important as well. So we declare things to be of our opinion, of our making, you know. I think to be public in that sense and to be able to be facing criticism, you know, and to engaging in serious and constructive discussions is also a quality I'm really looking holding close to my heart as well.
It's also something that I feel you're doing a lot, and you're probably also doing with your students.
Exactly, but of course, and that on that level, I think we share a lot of commonalities. I mean, you talked already about this kind of immediacy with working students in the classroom and so on and so
being
forth.
the spark, kind of,
Exactly.
you know, like giving them like enthusiasm to start
Exactly.
their own thing, really.
Exactly, and this is my core message. You know, I mean, teaching is that's a whole other conversation. You know, and I'm thinking about teaching heavily as well in many because I must. You know, if you happen to be a teacher, you have to think about it. You don't just take a textbook, stand in front of a group of people, and tell them what they are supposed to know. You know. This is really something, I mean, a lot of people do it. I believe it's old school and we shouldn't be doing it anymore, to put it on simple terms. But I think it's much more important to say, let's try to infuse the students with the kind of basic elements they need in order to get active and get creative themselves. You know?
Exactly.
So exactly, that's kind of sparkling, inspirational sort of getting the kind of thing across moment, you know, that you talked about, is exactly what I believe teaching should be all about. You know, it's sort of getting the message across that whatever is necessary to be creative and do great work lies within the students themselves. You know, you only need to unlock the potential, but not with like a million textbooks, you know, that someone is supposed to read according to some curricula, but with something that is more sort of tangible, more immediate. Yeah, exactly.
A spark. Give them the spark.
Exactly.
Time is running out. It's really great talking to you, as always. We could continue forever. We
will anyways.
We will. We will also, we have a project in the pipeline with and in Serbia, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, me too.
So we will maybe, you know, meet some of you guys at some point, you know.
I'm sure.
So it was really great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
we're
Coco.
gonna check out your work also. All the links and details are gonna be somewhere below, somewhere there. They always show. And yeah, and thank you very much to the team from PDP. You know, they really over the years have really become something like really dear friends. I've had amazing times there. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be in such an inspiring place, you know, to record our thoughts and our conversation. And yeah, I hope you guys could take a little bit away from this. Thank you so much also to our man behind the camera, Luka Sabot, a really dear friend, collaborator and student of both of ours, great artist. He was helping us today with even more technology, but I think everything worked fine, hopefully. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys. And
we're going to come to Novi Sad anytime
we're
soon.
gonna come anyway, because it's really got a big place in my heart. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.